Failure. You're a loser. My son Evan screamed these words at me, his wife Sarah right beside him in the middle of Mother's Day, in front of all the guests at an elegant restaurant. Their cruel laughter filled the air as I sat there seemingly defeated, just the poor old woman everyone thought I was. But what they didn't know was that in my purse I had a small golden envelope that would change everything in a matter of minutes. With a calmness that surprised even me, I slowly slid my little gift across the glass table. Sarah looked at it with contempt and muttered, "What is this now? Another one of your pathetic attempts to get attention." Her eyes shone with that cruelty I had seen so many times, that look that made me feel like an annoying insect they had to put up with. The other guests watched us with morbid curiosity, waiting for another spectacle of family humiliation. But when I opened my lips and began to speak in a voice as serene as ice, panic began to creep across their faces. "Explain to your wife why the $10,000 monthly allowance you receive is going to disappear in the next 5 minutes," I said, looking directly into Evan's eyes. My voice was so calm it brutally contrasted with the storm I was about to unleash. "Explain to your in-laws, Edward and Francis, why the $2 million mansion where they live and the 3 luxury cars in the garage are going to disappear before this dessert is finished." Sarah's mocking smile began to fade slowly, as if she had just heard something her brain refused to process. Evan, for his part, was completely frozen, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. "And explain to your partner Daniel why the company you think is yours will be dead before we leave this restaurant." I continued savoring every second of their growing confusion. I slowly rose from my chair, feeling every eye in the restaurant fixated on me. That's when the real panic began to show on their faces. Evan turned pale as if he had seen a ghost. His cheeks lost all color, and his lips began to tremble imperceptibly. Sarah dropped her wine glass, the red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood on snow as she babbled incoherently. The other guests were completely silent, creating a silence so thick you could cut it with a knife. My son's hands began to shake visibly as he stammered in a broken voice. Mom, what are you talking about?" You have nothing. We've been supporting you for years. You live off the charity we give you, off the $500 we send you each month to survive in that horrible little house." "Oh, my dear son," I replied with a smile I hadn't shown in decades, a smile that held years of silent pain and meticulous planning. "I think it's time you met the real Damaris." My words floated in the air like a death sentence, and I could see the terror beginning to grip their souls as they realized something monumental was about to change forever. The golden envelope contained only a small sample of what was to come. The original deeds to the mansion where they lived, signed in my name 15 years ago. The titles for the 3 Mercedes-Benz cars they drove, as if they were their own, bought with my money, and registered under my name through shell companies. And most devastating of all the documents that proved I was the true owner of 80% of the construction company they thought they had built with their own effort and talent. Impossible. Sarah whispered, her voice breaking as she read the documents with hands that trembled like leaves in the wind. Her face had taken on a grayish tone I had never seen before. "This has to be fake. You live in that awful little house in the poor neighborhood, you drive that beat-up car that makes weird noises, you buy used clothes at flea markets." Her perfect world, built on lies and arrogance, began to crumble before her eyes, as she realized that the poor old woman she had humiliated for years was actually a multimillionaire who had been watching her every move, every betrayal, every cruelty. But I'm getting too far ahead in this story of perfect revenge. For you to really understand how I got to that moment of sweet justice, when I could see the absolute terror reflected in their eyes, I need to take you back 6 months to when I made the smartest decision of my life, to become the invisible woman of my own family. 6 months ago, I was exactly what I appeared to be, a 64-year-old grandmother living a seemingly simple and modest life. My routine was predictable, like a Swiss watch. Every morning, I woke up at 6 o'clock in my small 2-bedroom house in the Oakwood district, made my black coffee in an old coffee pot I bought at a flea market, and sat in my worn-out armchair to read the newspaper while listening to the news on my antique radio. My house was deliberately humble, Cream-colored walls that needed a new coat of paint, furniture I had bought, secondhand basic appliances that worked but looked worn from years of use. My refrigerator was covered in family photos where I always appeared smiling next to Evan and Sarah like the perfect grandmother who unconditionally adored her family. Those photos hurt me every time I saw them because they showed a happiness that no longer existed in reality. My son Evan was 42 and appeared to be the successful man he had always dreamed of being. Tall, with perfectly combed dark hair, he always wore expensive suits paired with Swiss watches that cost more than an average person's annual salary. He drove a new silver Mercedes-Benz, lived in a mansion in the exclusive Beacon Heights neighborhood, and boasted of being the founder of Herrera Construction, a company he supposedly built with his intelligence and determination. Sarah, my 38-year-old daughter-in-law, was the perfect definition of a trophy wife. Platinum blonde with extensions down to her waist, always impeccable acrylic nails, and a collection of designer dresses that changed with the season. Her lips were permanently plumped with Botox, her eyebrows perfectly shaped with microblading, and she never left the house without makeup that took her over an hour to apply. She drove a red Mercedes-Benz that Evan had given her for her birthday, and she spent her days between the spa, the exclusive gym, and the luxury stores at the most expensive mall in the city. Sarah's parents, Edward and Frances, lived with them in the mansion. Edward was a 65-year-old man who had retired early, thanks to Evan's generosity, who had gotten him a well-paying job at the construction company. Frances, 62, tended to the mansion's garden and cooked for the whole family. They both treated Evan as if he were the family's savior, the perfect son-in-law who had rescued their daughter from a life of mediocrity. Every Sunday religiously, I would visit the mansion for family lunch. I would arrive in my small white 2010 car, which made strange noises as it climbed the steep hills to Beacon Heights. I always brought a homemade dessert that I had prepared with my own hands: chocolate cakes, coconut flans, or oatmeal cookies. My gifts were received with forced smiles and condescending comments like, "Oh, you shouldn't have," or "How sweet, you're always so thoughtful." The family dynamic was perfectly clear from the moment I walked through the front door. I was the second-class guest, the poor grandmother who depended on the kindness of her successful son. They would seat me in the least comfortable chair in the dining room, serve me on the oldest plates, and my opinions were ignored or dismissed with nervous laughter. Sarah always found subtle ways to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. "Damaris, how are you managing with the house expenses?" she would ask with false concern as she cut her imported steak. "I hope the $500 Evan sends you each month is enough for you. We know it's hard to manage money at your age." Her comments always came with a little smile that didn't reach her eyes, the expression she used when she wanted to make me feel small and grateful. Evan, on the other hand, had developed the habit of talking to me as if I were a child who needed simple explanations to understand the world. "Mom, you have to understand that maintaining this house costs a lot of money. The property taxes are $8,000 a year, not to mention maintenance, utilities, and food for 5 people. We make a huge effort to help you with that $500 a month, but sometimes it's hard to balance our own needs with yours." What really broke my heart was seeing how they had built a perfect narrative where they were the generous heroes, and I was the grateful beneficiary. Daniel, Evan's business partner, frequently visited the house to discuss business, and they always introduced me as Evan's mom, who lives on a very small pension, but we help her because family is the most important thing. Daniel was a 45-year-old man, bald with a prominent belly that he tried to hide with expensive vests. He had a way of speaking that betrayed his humble origins, but he managed to project an image of sophistication that was more comical than convincing. He always spoke to me with that special condescension reserved for the elderly. "Mrs. Damaris, what a pleasure to see you. Evan always tells us how proud he is to be able to take care of you in your old age." Sundays had become a ritual of subtle but constant humiliation. After lunch, while the men retired to the study to discuss business over $500 bottles of whiskey, Sarah would drag me to the kitchen under the pretext of helping with the dishes. It was there that she really showed her true nature, where she took off the mask of the polite daughter-in-law and told me exactly what she thought of me. "Damaris, I think it's time we spoke frankly," she had said to me one particularly cruel Sunday while drying a crystal glass with dramatically careful movements. "You're getting older, and frankly these weekly visits are becoming a burden for all of us. Evan works hard all week. Sundays are his only day off, and having to worry about entertaining you is becoming exhausting." But all of that was about to change forever. Because what they didn't know was that the real Damaris had been observing, taking notes, and preparing the most brilliant move of her life. The following months turned into a downward spiral of increasingly elaborate and cruel humiliations, as if they had decided they no longer needed to keep up appearances with me. Evan and Sarah began to show their true contempt without filters or pretense. Each Sunday transformed into a new opportunity to remind me how insignificant I was in their perfect lives. The first sign that something had definitively changed came one Sunday in February when I arrived at the mansion as usual with my homemade carrot cake and my hopeful smile. Sarah opened the front door dressed in a pink tracksuit that cost more than my monthly rent, and she didn't even pretend to be happy to see me. "Oh, you're here," she said with an exaggerated sigh, as if my presence were a major inconvenience she had forgotten she would have to endure. "Let me guess," she continued, looking at the cake box in my hands with obvious disdain. "Another one of your homemade creations. Damaris, we've told you 1,000 times we have a personal chef. We don't need you to bring these things." The word "things" came out of her mouth as if she were describing radioactive waste. "Besides, Francis is on a doctor-ordered diet, Edward is diabetic, I'm watching my figure, and Evan is avoiding sugar. Literally, no one in this house is going to eat what you brought." But she didn't stop there. She took me to the kitchen and right in front of my eyes threw my cake directly into the trash can without even opening the box. "It's better if we don't waste time pretending someone's going to try it," she declared as she washed her hands as if she had touched something contaminated. "Frankly, Damaris, I think it's time you accepted that your days of being useful in the kitchen are over." Evan had developed a new strategy to demonstrate his superiority. He talked about money constantly, always in terms that made me feel like a beggar. During lunches, he began to openly discuss the household expenses, emphasizing astronomical figures that supposedly overwhelmed him. "The monthly pool maintenance costs us $1,200, he would announce while cutting his imported salmon. "The gardener is $2,000 a month, the maid, another $1,500, not to mention the gas for the 3 cars, which easily reaches $800 a week." Then he would look me straight in the eye and add, "That's why, Mom, I hope you understand why we're sometimes late with your allowance. $500 might not seem like much to you, but for us, it represents a real effort when we have so many fixed expenses." The cruel irony of his words pierced me like daggers, because he knew perfectly well that $500 was not a small amount for someone supposedly living on a minimal pension. Sarah had perfected the art of social humiliation. She started inviting her friends from the tennis club during my Sunday visits, apparently to show off her perfect life, but really to use me as an example of what they didn't want to become. "Girls, let me introduce you to my mother-in-law," Damaris, she would announce with a fake smile as I sat on the oldest sofa in the living room. "She's such a brave woman, isn't she? She lives alone in a very modest little house and gets by on very little money. We try to help her as we can, but you know how it is. You can't solve everyone's life for them." Her friends, women between 35 and 40, all with the same face tightened by plastic surgery and the same rehearsed laugh, would look at me with that mix of pity and superiority they reserved for the less fortunate. "Oh, how admirable," one of them would say, a redhead with obvious extensions named Samantha. "I couldn't live without my Mercedes, my European vacations, my beauty treatments. I find it incredible how older people settle for so little." The social degradation intensified when they started assigning me household chores during my visits. "Damaris, since you're here, could you help me clean the living room windows?" Sarah would ask me with a venomous sweetness. "Francis is busy with dinner, and frankly, at your age, you need to stay active so you don't get rusty." They would give me an old rag and a cheap cleaning spray while they sat drinking imported cocktails and laughing at gossip from the country club. But the last straw came one Sunday in March when they decided to rearrange the dining room table to optimize space. My usual spot at the main table mysteriously disappeared, and in its place they put a folding chair in a corner, separate from the main group. "We bought a new dinnerware set for 8 people," Evan explained without even looking me in the eye. "And your spot was disrupting the symmetry of the design." From my new position, I could hear their conversations perfectly, but I couldn't participate in them. It was like being a ghost in my own family present, but invisible, tolerated but not welcome. They talked about trips they were planning, expensive restaurants they had visited, jewelry Sarah wanted for her next birthday, all always in terms of expenses that I, of course, could never afford. "We're thinking of going to the Bahamas in April," Sarah announced, admiring her freshly manicured nails. "I booked a presidential suite that costs $5,000 a night, but Evan says I deserve it after all the stress I've been under lately." She would shoot me meaningful glances when she said stress, as if my mere existence was the source of all her problems. Daniel began to visit them more frequently, and their business conversations became increasingly exclusive and elaborate. They talked about multi-million-dollar contracts, construction projects that would generate 6-figure profits, and real estate investments that would make them even richer. But what really caught my attention was the way they discussed the company's financial structure. "The construction of the Los Pinos residential complex will generate a net profit of $2.5 million, Daniel declared while reviewing documents on his tablet. "The land is valued at $800,000. Construction will cost us $1,200,000, and we already have pre-sales for $4 million. It's pure math." Evan would nod with authority, as if he were the one who had secured the initial capital for all those projects. "What I'm most proud of is having built all this from scratch." He would lie shamelessly while toasting with $500 whiskey. "Starting with nothing and getting to this point requires vision, intelligence, and a lot of hard work." But the cruelty reached levels I never imagined when they began to openly discuss my future, as if I weren't present. "I think Damaris is becoming too much of a burden," Sarah commented one afternoon while touching up her makeup in the dining room mirror. "She can no longer take care of herself properly, and frankly, these Sunday visits are affecting our family life." "You're right," Evan replied without looking up from his phone. "Besides, the house where she lives is deteriorating more and more. The neighborhood is becoming dangerous, and at her age, any accident could be fatal." His words sounded as if he were describing a logistical problem he needed to solve, not his own mother. It was then that I heard the conversation that would change everything forever. While I pretended to be dozing in my folding chair, Sarah and Evan began to plan my fate as if they were organizing a vacation. It was the Sunday after April Fool's Day when my world completely fell apart, but not in the way they expected. That day, I arrived at the mansion as usual, but something in the air felt different, more tense, as if they had been waiting for my arrival to execute a plan they had been slowly brewing. Sarah greeted me at the door with a smile that chilled me to the bone, too wide, too perfect, like a shark's smile before it attacks. "Damaris, so glad you arrived early," she said, guiding me to the living room with an exaggerated gentleness that immediately put me on high alert. "We have some important things to discuss with you today, things that will change your life for the better. We're very excited to share our ideas with you." Her words sounded rehearsed, as if she had practiced this speech in front of the mirror for weeks. Evan was sitting in his Italian leather armchair, dressed in one of his $3,000 suits, but for the first time in months, he looked me directly in the eyes when I entered the room. "Mom, sit here," he said, pointing to the sofa in front of him, not the folding chair in the corner where they had recently relegated me. "We want to talk to you about something very important, something we've been planning because we love you and care very much about your well-being." My gut screamed that something was terribly wrong. In recent months, the only times they had treated me with kindness were when they wanted something from me, usually for me to leave earlier than usual, or not to come the next Sunday for some made-up excuse. This sudden warmth was more terrifying than all their previous humiliations combined. "Damaris!" Sarah began perching on the arm of Evan's chair in a pose that looked like it was from a home decor magazine. "We've been watching you very carefully these past few weeks, and we've realized that living alone is no longer safe for you. Your health is deteriorating, your house is falling apart, the neighborhood where you live is getting more dangerous. As a responsible family, we can't allow our matriarch to live in such precarious conditions." Evan nodded gravely, as if they were discussing a matter of national security. "Mom, you're 64 years old. At that age, any fall, any health problem, any emergency could be fatal if you're alone. What would happen if you slipped in the bathroom and there was no one to help you? What if you had a heart attack in the middle of the night and couldn't call for help?" His arguments sounded logical on the surface, but there was something in his tone that made me feel like prey being cornered by hungry predators. Sarah got up from the arm of the chair and began to pace the room with theatrical movements as if giving a business presentation. "That's why," she announced with calculated drama, "we've found the perfect solution for all our problems. We've been researching for months, visiting facilities, talking to specialists, and we've finally found the ideal place for you." She pulled a sleek brochure with colorful photos from her purse and sat next to me on the sofa, getting so close I could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something that reminded me of fear. "It's called Sunset Gardens Retirement Community," she said, opening the brochure with feigned enthusiasm. "It's a luxury retirement community specially designed for people your age who deserve to live their golden years with dignity and comfort." The photos showed facilities that looked like a 5-star hotel: private rooms with garden views, elegant dining rooms with white tablecloths, recreation rooms with big-screen TVs, even a small chapel and a library. The pictures featured smiling seniors playing cards, walking through perfectly manicured gardens, participating in dance classes and craft workshops. "Look at these facilities." Sarah continued turning the pages of the brochure as if selling a vacation package. "They have 24-hour medical service-trained nurses, a professional chef, daily recreational activities, cleaning service, laundry, even a beauty salon. Imagine, Damaris, you'll never have to worry about cleaning your house, cooking, going to the supermarket, anything. Everything will be taken care of for you." Evan leaned forward, clasping his hands, as if about to reveal the world's best-kept secret. "And best of all, Mom, is that we're going to pay for everything. The monthly fee is $2,500, plus additional expenses, but you won't have to worry about a single penny. We'll take care of absolutely everything because you're our family, and we love you." I felt as if the world had stopped around me. $2,500 a month was 5 times more than what they supposedly gave me to live on. If I really lived on $500 a month, as they believed, this generosity would represent a huge financial sacrifice for them. But something in their eyes told me this plan had nothing to do with filial love or genuine concern. When would I have to move?" I asked, trying to keep my voice as neutral as possible, while my mind raced to understand the true motives behind this seemingly generous proposal. Sarah and Evan exchanged a look that lasted barely a second, but told me everything I needed to know. It was a look of conspiracy, of relief, as if they had just overcome the most difficult obstacle in their master plan. "Well," Sarah said, trying to sound casual, "we've already made a tentative reservation for next month. We thought it would be perfect for you to move right after Mother's Day. That way you can celebrate one last special occasion with us in the family home, and then start your new life in a more appropriate environment for your needs." Mother's Day was less than 3 weeks away. They were giving me an ultimatum disguised as a gift, a family expulsion wrapped in gift paper and adorned with bows of false concern. But what terrified me most was realizing they had probably been planning this for months, maybe even years. "Besides," Evan added in a tone that tried to sound reassuring but felt threatening to me, "we've already spoken to a real estate agent about your house. The market isn't great for properties in your area, but we think we could get about $30,000 if we sell it quickly. That money could cover almost a full year of your stay at Sunset Gardens, so it would really be like your own house is paying for your future comfort." $30,000 for a house that, although modest, I had bought 10 years ago for $60,000 and was now worth at least $80,000 on the current market. But to them, $30,000 was a bargain that would allow them to get rid of me, and at the same time look like the generous children who had sacrificed everything for their mother's well-being. "We have an appointment to visit this Wednesday," Sarah continued, clearly excited that I hadn't offered immediate resistance to their plan. You can see the facilities, talk to other residents, see your room. I'm sure you're going to love it. People your age need to be surrounded by people of their own generation with similar interests and compatible life experiences. But it was then that Daniel arrived unexpectedly for an impromptu business meeting, and my world changed forever. While they retired to the study to discuss construction matters, I stayed in the living room, apparently reading a magazine, but actually processing everything I had just heard. It was during that wait that Sarah made the biggest mistake of her life. She left her cell phone on the coffee table while she went to the bathroom to touch up her makeup, and the screen lit up with a message notification. It wasn't my intention to spy, but the message was from her sister, and the first lines were clearly visible on the lock screen. Did you convince the old hag to go to the nursing home? Yet Mom says as soon as she's gone, you can remodel the whole house without her being in the way. She also says Dad is already excited to use the whole garage for his projects. My blood ran cold. It wasn't just Evan and Sarah, it was her whole family. Everyone knew about the plan. Everyone was waiting for my departure as if it were a long-awaited liberation. I quietly got up from the sofa and approached the phone. With trembling hands, I swiped up to see more messages in the conversation. What I read next shattered my soul, but at the same time it ignited a flame of fury I didn't know still existed within me. The messages I read on Sarah's phone were like daggers straight to the heart, but they were also like electric shocks that woke up something inside me that had been dormant for too long. With trembling hands, I continued to read the conversation that revealed the true nature of their master plan. You have no idea how easy it was to convince her, Sarah had written just 2 days before. The old woman is so desperate to feel loved that she swallowed the whole luxury nursing home story. Evan acted like we were making a huge financial sacrifice, but the reality is that with the $2,500 we're going to pay monthly, we'll save a lot more money by not having her here every Sunday eating our expensive food. Her sister's reply was even worse. Ha 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 ha, you guys are so smart. Besides, once she's admitted, it'll be much easier for her to gradually lose contact with you. Old people in those places get depressed and antisocial. In a year, she probably won't even want you to visit. But the message that truly took my breath away said, best of all, Dad already spoke to his lawyer friend. He says if you can get her committed for mental incapacity due to age, after 6 months, you can apply for legal guardianship over her and take control of any savings she has. Even if it's just a few $1,000s, every penny counts. My brain processed that information like it was a nuclear bomb. They didn't just want to get rid of me. They planned to have me declared mentally incompetent to steal every last cent of my supposedly small savings. The irony was so brutal, it almost made me laugh hysterically. If they only knew my net worth exceeded $15 million, they probably would have planned my murder instead of my commitment. I quickly took pictures of all the messages with my own phone before Sarah returned from the bathroom. My hands were no longer shaking. Now they moved with the surgical precision of someone who has found their purpose. For the next 30 minutes, while they continued their business meeting, I mentally developed the most elaborate revenge strategy of my life. That night, in the privacy of my small house, I began to plan my counterattack with the methodicalness of a general preparing for war. The first thing I did was contact my personal lawyer, Mark Vance, a 58-year-old man who had handled my legal affairs for over 2 decades. Mark was one of the few people who knew my true financial situation and had always respected my decision to maintain a low profile. Damaris, he said to me on the phone that night, his voice filled with concern when I told him what I had discovered. This is much more serious than we initially thought. If they really try to have you declared incompetent, they could create complicated legal problems, especially if they have accomplices in the judicial system. We need to act quickly and intelligently. Over the next few days, Mark and I worked together to create what he called the most solid protection network he had ever designed. First, we updated all my wills and legal documents, making it absolutely clear that I was of sound mind and that any future attempt to declare me incompetent would be fraudulent. Second, we organized all the evidence of my true net worth in an order that would be impossible to refute. The deeds to the mansion where they lived dated 15 years ago and registered under my name through the shell company Pacific Investments, Inc. The titles for the 3 Mercedes-Benz cars, bought with direct bank transfers from my personal accounts. The corporate documents proving that I owned 80% of Herrera Construction through a complex chain of anonymous societies and trusts. But most devastating of all were the bank records showing each of the $10,000 monthly transfers they had been receiving for the past 8 years, all coming from my accounts and channeled through different financial institutions to make them seem like they were from external investors or government contracts. Mark had been brilliant in structuring this operation. "Damaris," he explained as we reviewed the documents in his office. "What we did here was create a situation where you could observe your family's true character without money interfering with their decisions. They have been living off your generosity for years, but since they didn't know it was coming from you, their actions reflect exactly who they are when they believe they have nothing to lose or gain from you." The third step of my plan involved hiring a private investigator, Arthur Miller, a 53-year-old ex-cop who specialized in family fraud cases. Arthur had the perfect appearance to go unnoticed, average height, normal build, and easily forgettable face. But his mind was like an information processing machine. "Mrs. Damaris," he told me during our first meeting in a discreet downtown cafe. "I've seen many cases of family abuse throughout my career, but this one has elements that make it particularly interesting. Your son and daughter-in-law have built a completely false life supported by your money, but they've come to believe their own lies about their success." Arthur spent the next 2 weeks meticulously documenting Evan and Sarah's true financial situation. The results were even more shocking than I had imagined. Without my $10,000 monthly transfers, they had absolutely no real income. The successful construction company was basically a front that depended entirely on the contracts I secretly financed through my business connections. "Look at these records," Arthur showed me during our second meeting, spreading a folder full of documents on the table. "Your son has personal debts of over $200,000 on credit cards and bank loans. Your daughter-in-law owes an additional $150,000 for luxury purchases and cosmetic treatments. The mortgage on the mansion is 3 payments behind, and they've only avoided foreclosure because you've been covering the payments through the trust." But the most devastating information was about Daniel, the supposed business partner. "This man," Arthur continued, "has no capital invested in the company. His stake is completely fictitious. He basically acts as a front man for projects. You Finance receives a 10% commission for his involvement, and then Evan takes credit for all the business successes." The fourth step of my plan was the most delicate. I needed to create irrefutable evidence of their true intentions without alerting them to my discoveries. For this, Mark helped me discreetly install recording devices in the mansion during one of my Sunday visits. Since I had free access to the whole house and they considered me completely harmless, it was surprisingly easy to place tiny microphones in the study, the kitchen, and the main living room. Over the next 2 weeks, those devices captured conversations that confirmed my worst suspicions. Evan and Sarah not only planned to commit me, but they had already started making arrangements to sell my property. They had forged my signature on preliminary documents and were working with a corrupt notary to speed up the sale process. "Once she's in the home," I heard Evan say during a phone call with someone who sounded like a lawyer, "we're going to need the legal incapacitation process to be as fast as possible. We have fake medical reports documenting her mental decline and several witnesses willing to testify that she has been acting irrationally." The lawyer's response was equally chilling. "Mr. Evan, with the documentation you've provided, I can guarantee that in less than 4 months, you'll have complete legal control over all of your mother's assets. The procedure will cost $20,000, but considering you'll recover at least $100,000 from the sale of the house, it's a very profitable investment." But the moment that sealed their fate came when I heard Sarah talking on the phone with her sister. "The stupid old hag is so excited to move into the luxury home that she even thanked me for taking such good care of her. She has no idea that Sunset Gardens is basically a prison for the elderly where they'll medicate her until she's a zombie. In 6 months, she won't even remember her own name." It was time to act. Mother's Day was only 5 days away, and I had everything ready for the most satisfying performance of my life. Mother's Day dawned with a clear sky that seemed to mock the storm about to break. I woke up at 5 in the morning, not because I had to, but because the adrenaline rushing through my veins had kept me awake most of the night. Today was the day that the humble, submissive Damaris would die forever, and the woman I should have always been would be born. I dressed with special care that morning. I chose a wine-red dress I had discreetly bought the week before, nothing ostentatious, but elegant enough to send a subliminal message. I styled my hair simply but impeccably, applied light makeup to look healthy and alert, and for the first time in years, I wore the pearl necklace I had inherited from my mother, the only piece of luxury I allowed myself to wear in public without raising suspicion. In my purse, I carried the golden envelope that held my family's fate. Inside were copies of all the legal documents that would prove my true financial identity, but more importantly, I carried something they would never expect: the immediate cancellation contracts for all the services, properties, and benefits they had been enjoying unknowingly. I arrived at the mansion at exactly noon as we had agreed. Sarah had organized a special Mother's Day lunch and had invited not only her parents, Edward and Frances, but also Daniel and his wife, two couples who were friends from the country club, and surprisingly, an older man I didn't recognize, but whom Evan introduced as Dr. Ramsey, a specialist in geriatrics. The doctor's presence confirmed my suspicion was correct. They had planned to use this gathering to begin the process of having me declared mentally incompetent. They probably expected me to say or do something during lunch that the doctor could interpret as a sign of cognitive decline. "Mom," Evan exclaimed with an exaggerated joy that bordered on comical. "You look so beautiful today. That dress fits you perfectly, doesn't it, Sarah?" His performance was worthy of an amateur theater award, but all the guests smiled and nodded, as if they truly believed in this farce of a loving family. Sarah came over to give me a hug that lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough for the guests' cameras to capture the moment, but not long enough to show genuine affection. "My dear," she murmured in my ear, "today is going to be a very special day for you. We have so many surprises prepared." Her voice had that venomous quality I knew so well, but disguised under layers of false sweetness. The dining room was decorated with fresh flowers, and the table was set with the house's most elegant dinnerware. They assigned me a place at the head of the table, a position of honor that immediately put me on high alert. For months they had relegated me to folding chairs in the corners, and now suddenly they were treating me like the queen of the celebration. Clearly, this courtesy had a hidden purpose. The first 30 minutes passed in what seemed to be a normal family celebration. The guests congratulated me on having such a wonderful and generous family, commented on how lucky I was to have such a successful son and such a dedicated daughter-in-law. Daniel spoke at length about Evan's impressive business achievements, while his wife praised Sarah's exquisite taste in home decor. But I could feel the electric tension in the air. Sarah and Evan exchanged meaningful glances as if waiting for the perfect moment to execute the next phase of their plan. Dr. Ramsey watched me discreetly, taking mental notes of my every word and action. It was like being on a stage playing the role of the naive grandmother while the real villains prepared for my public execution. The moment they had been waiting for came during dessert. Sarah stood up from her chair with a glass of champagne in her hand and a smile that could have lit up an entire stadium. "Dear guests," she announced in a theatrical voice, "as you all know, today we celebrate not only Mother's Day, but also the beginning of a new chapter in the life of our dear Damaris." All eyes turned to me, and I could feel the air in the dining room grow thick. Evan joined his wife, placing a protective hand on my shoulder in a gesture that seemed affectionate but felt like a jailer's grip. "As a responsible family," Evan continued, his voice filled with false emotion, "we have made the difficult but necessary decision to help our mother move to a place where she can receive the specialized care she deserves at this stage of her life. Sunset Gardens is a first-class retirement residence where she can enjoy the company of people her age and 24-hour medical services." Murmurs of approval filled the room. "What dedicated children," commented one of Sarah's friends. It's admirable to see how they sacrifice their personal comfort to ensure their mother's well-being. Dr. Ramsey nodded gravely, as if witnessing an act of filial heroism. But then Sarah dropped the bomb they had been preparing for weeks. "And to make this transition easier for everyone," she declared, with crocodile tears shining in her eyes, "we have also made the difficult decision to sell the little house where Mom Damaris has lived for so many years. The money from that sale will cover a large part of the residence's expenses, so she can live comfortably without being a financial burden to anyone." It was at that precise moment that I decided I had heard enough. For 64 years of my life, I had let other people make decisions for me, speak for me, define who I was and what I deserved. But that day, in front of that whole audience of accomplices and witnesses, I decided it was time for them to meet the real Damaris. I rose slowly from my chair, feeling all eyes fixated on me with expectation. Sarah and Evan were smiling with that arrogant confidence of those who believe they have absolute control of the situation. But when I took the golden envelope from my purse and placed it gently on the glass table, their smiles began to vanish like vapor in the cold air. "Before we continue with this very emotional celebration," I said in a voice so calm it dramatically contrasted with the chaos I was about to unleash, "I believe there are a few things you all need to know about me." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the grandfather clock ticking from the other side of the house. Sarah had visibly paled, and Evan was completely still, as if sensing something monumentally important was about to happen. "Evan, my dear son," I continued, looking him straight in the eye, "I think it's time you explain a few very interesting things to all these witnesses." My voice remained serene, but it had acquired an authority that no one in that room had ever heard from me before. "For example, could you explain to your wife why the $10,000 monthly allowance you both receive is going to permanently disappear in the next 5 minutes? Sarah's eyes widened like saucers, and Daniel nearly choked on his wine. But I was just getting started. "You could also explain to your dear in-laws Edward and Francis why the beautiful $2 million mansion, where they've been living so comfortably, is going to vanish from their lives before this dessert is finished." The words left my mouth like precision bullets, each one designed to hit exactly where it would hurt the most. "And finally," I added, savoring every second of their growing panic, "could you explain to your partner Daniel why the construction company you think you built with your own talent and effort is going to die before we leave this restaurant?" It was then that I stood up completely from my chair, and real panic began to spread across their faces like a contagious plague. The silence that followed my words was so thick it felt solid. Evan's mouth was hanging open, as if he had stopped processing information, while Sarah had turned so pale that her foundation couldn't hide the grayish color her face had taken on. The guests looked back and forth between us, not fully understanding what was happening, but instinctively feeling they were witnessing something historic. "Mom," Evan finally stammered, his voice breaking like a teenager's. What are you talking about? You don't have any money. We've been helping you for years." His words came out in clipped fragments, as if his brain refused to process the possibility that his entire world was about to collapse. I smiled with a serenity that surprised even me, and slowly opened the golden envelope as if I were unwrapping a birthday present. "Oh, my dear son, allow me to show you exactly what I'm talking about." I took out the first document and placed it on the table where everyone could see it. "This is the original deed to this beautiful mansion, signed and registered in my name 15 years ago through my company Pacific Investments." Daniel had stood up so abruptly he knocked over his chair. That's impossible," he muttered, stepping closer to examine the document. His eyes scanned the lines of the paper as if he were reading a foreign language. "Evan, you told me you bought this house with the money from the first construction contracts." "Because that's what I believed," Evan whispered, his voice barely audible. He had taken the document with trembling hands and was examining it as if expecting the letters to magically change before his eyes. "Mom, this has to be a mistake, some kind of legal mix-up." But I was already pulling out the second set of documents. Here are the titles for the 3 Mercedes-Benz cars you all enjoy driving so much, I announced, placing the papers one by one on the table like cards in a poker game. The silver one Evan drives purchased with a $120,000 transfer from my personal account at the National Bank. The red one Sarah drives $110,000, same account. And the black one that Edward and Francis use $95,000. Sarah had begun to shake visibly. No, this can't be happening, she repeated like a mantra, frantically reviewing the documents. You live in that horrible little house, you wear old clothes, your car makes weird noises. Her voice grew shriller, with each word bordering on hysterical. Oh, yes, I said with a smile that probably looked devilish. My little performance. Did you know that for all these years I've been living exactly the life I wanted you to see? My real home is in the financial district, a 3,000-square-foot penthouse with a panoramic view of the city. My noisy car is a collector's edition Volkswagen that I keep precisely because I like its character, but I also have a BMW and a Lexus in my private garage. The guests had started murmuring among themselves, some pulling out their phones to record what had clearly become the most spectacular family drama they had ever witnessed. Dr. Ramsey, who was supposedly there to assess my mental competence, watched me with a mixture of astonishment and professional admiration. But the final blow came when I pulled out the corporate documents for Herrera Construction. And now the crown jewel, I announced, fanning the papers out. Daniel, my dear son's partner, I hope you've enjoyed these years of pretending to be a successful businessman. Because it turns out that 80% of the company you think you helped build has belonged to me from day one. Daniel sank into his chair as if he had been physically struck. Impossible, he murmured, but his voice had lost all conviction. The contracts, the clients, the initial capital, it all came from our contacts and our work. It came from my contacts and my money, I corrected firmly. Every major contract you've secured in the last 8 years was arranged through my connections in the industry. The land for the Los Pinos residential complex, which has earned you $2.5 million in profit, was purchased by me through a trust. The capital for all construction projects came from my bank accounts, channeled through different institutions to appear as external financing. Evan had stood up and was pacing around the table like a caged animal. But why? Why would you do this? Why did you lie to us all these years? The question gave me the perfect opportunity for the most satisfying moment of this entire revelation. Why did I lie to you? I repeated, and for the first time in the conversation, I allowed real emotion to filter into my voice. I didn't lie to you, dear son. You never asked me about my real situation. You assumed I was poor. You decided to treat me like a burden, and you built your entire relationship with me based on that assumption. Sarah had started to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse, but of pure terror for what this meant for her future. Damaris, please, she pleaded, her voice breaking. We can fix this. We can change. We can treat you better. You don't have to punish us like this. Punish you? I asked, genuinely surprised by her choice of words. I'm not punishing you, dear Sarah. I'm simply withdrawing my financial support from people who have proven they don't deserve it. I took out my cell phone and dialed a number I had on speed dial. Mark, it's Damaris. Yes, proceed with all the cancellations immediately. What cancellations? Evan asked, but his voice had taken on the desperate tone of someone who already knows the answer but refuses to accept it. Well, I said. First, the immediate cancellation of all the monthly transfers you've been receiving. Second, the eviction notice for this mansion with 30 days to vacate. Third, the revocation of all permits to use the vehicles registered in my name. Daniel had turned completely white. But the current construction contracts, we have commitments to clients. The current contracts will be transferred to the new management of the company, I replied calmly. I've decided to put real professionals in charge, not people who believe their own lies about their business talent. I addressed him directly. Your involvement in Herrera Construction ends today, Daniel. I hope you've saved some of the 10% commission I've been paying you all these years. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. I took out my phone again and played one of the recordings I had captured in previous weeks. Sarah's voice filled the dining room. The stupid old hag is so excited to move into the luxury home that she even thanked me for taking such good care of her. She has no idea that Sunset Gardens is basically a prison for the elderly where they'll medicate her until she's a zombie." The silence that followed was absolute. The guests looked at us in horror, finally understanding the true nature of what they had been witnessing. Francis and Edward looked completely shattered, as if they had just realized their daughter was a sociopath. "I also have recordings of all your conversations about having me declared mentally incompetent." I continued watching as panic spread across their faces like an oil slick. The consultations with corrupt lawyers, the plans to falsify medical reports, even the arrangements to sell my house without my knowledge using forged documents. Evan had sunk heavily into his chair, his head in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Mom, I'm sorry. We didn't know. If we had known the truth..." "You would have acted differently," I interrupted. "Do you really think the problem here was that you didn't know I have money? The problem wasn't that you planned to drug me in a nursing home, steal my small savings, and get rid of me like I was trash." My voice had turned cold as steel. "No. Evan, the problem is exactly who you are as people." And that's when they finally realized that not only had they lost all their money and property, but they had done it in front of witnesses who now knew their true intentions. Their social reputation, their status, their future, everything had crumbled in the space of 30 minutes. The empire of lies they had built had turned to ash, and I was the woman who had lit the fuse. 3 months after the Mother's Day lunch that changed everything, my life had transformed in ways I hadn't even fully anticipated. That Monday morning, as I drank my coffee on the terrace of my real home, a luxury penthouse in the heart of the financial district, I reflected on how the truth had liberated not only my spirit, but also my future. The view from my 25th floor window spanned the entire city. I could see the mountains in the distance, the river winding between the buildings, and the perfectly manicured gardens of the public parks. This had been my real home for the past 8 years, a sanctuary of peace and luxury that I had kept secret while playing the part of the poor, needy grandmother. My apartment reflected who I truly was, a woman of refined but not ostentatious tastes, intelligent and successful, but with her feet on the ground. The walls were decorated with original art from emerging local painters, not because they were expensive, but because I liked supporting new talent. My library took up an entire wall filled with biographies of female entrepreneurs, classic novels, and financial investment books I had studied religiously for decades. The kitchen was my personal pride with state-of-the-art appliances where I actually cooked, not like the act I had maintained in my fake little house. I had a collection of imported spices from around the world, professional utensils, and a pantry that was always well-stocked. Cooking wasn't a necessity for me, but a passion I had rediscovered in my new freedom. But the most significant transformation wasn't in my physical surroundings, but in how I related to the world. For years I had walked hunched over, dressed in modest clothes, avoiding attention. Now I walked tall with the confidence of a woman who had taken complete control of her destiny. My new routines included yoga classes at an exclusive studio dinners at the city's best restaurants, and most importantly, weekly meetings with my new social circle. Mark, my lawyer, had become more than just a legal advisor. He was now one of my closest friends. We met every Thursday afternoon in his office, not just to review legal matters, but to plan new investments and philanthropic projects. Damaris, he had told me last week while we were reviewing the financial statements of my companies, what you did wasn't just reclaiming your power, it was creating a model for how a woman can take control of her narrative at any age. The new management of Herrera Construction had turned out to be far more successful than it ever was under Evan and Daniel. I hired Eleanor Martinez, a 45-year-old civil engineer with an MBA and 20 years of experience in large-scale projects. In just 3 months, she had completely restructured operations, implemented new quality systems, and secured contracts that doubled our projected revenues. Mrs. Damaris, Eleanor had reported during our monthly meeting, the clients are amazed by the difference. Before projects were constantly delayed, there were communication problems and the quality of work was inconsistent. Now we deliver on time within budget and with standards that exceed expectations. Her professionalism and dedication confirmed that I had made the right decision in removing the previous managers. My social life had also flourished in unexpected ways. Through my yoga classes, I met a group of professional women my age who had become genuine friends. There were retired doctors, former executives of multinational corporations, successful artists and entrepreneurs who, like me, had built significant fortunes but preferred to keep a low profile. What I admire most about your story, Samantha, a 62-year-old former marketing director, had told me during one of our monthly dinners, is that you didn't seek revenge for revenge's sake. You sought justice, and the difference is enormous. These women understood the unique challenges of being successful in a society that often underestimates the power of older women. But perhaps the most significant change was in my relationship with myself. For years, I had allowed others to define my worth, to treat me as if I were invisible or irrelevant. Now, for the first time in decades, I felt completely aligned with who I truly was. I woke up every morning excited about the day's possibilities, not resigned to enduring humiliations. My morning routine had evolved to reflect this new confidence. After my coffee and financial news reading session, I would spend an hour in my private gym, not because I needed to stay in shape to impress anyone, but because it made me feel strong and vital. Then I would choose my clothes for the day carefully, not to hide, but to express exactly who I was, a successful, intelligent woman completely in control of her life. Weekends were dedicated to exploring passions I had postponed for years. I took oil painting classes at an adult workshop where I discovered I had a natural talent for landscapes. I joined a book club that focused on biographies of historical female entrepreneurs. I even started taking tango lessons, not because I had a partner, but because I had always wanted to learn and finally had the confidence to do it. But what gave me the most satisfaction was my new philanthropic project. With Mark's help, I had established the Invisible Women Foundation, dedicated to helping older women who had been victimized by financial family abuse. We worked with specialized lawyers, psychologists, and social workers to identify cases similar to mine and provide free legal and emotional resources. The number of cases we're uncovering is alarming. The Foundation's executive director, a social worker named Frances Guerrero, had explained to me, "There are thousands of women being financially manipulated by their own families, but they don't have the resources or information needed to defend themselves." Our program had already helped more than 50 women in situations similar to mine. One of our first beneficiaries was a 70-year-old woman named Eloisa, whose daughter had been stealing her pension for 5 years while convincing her she was too old to manage her own finances. With our legal help, she not only recovered her money, but also pressed criminal charges against her daughter for elder fraud. Mrs. Damaris, Eloisa had told me during our last meeting with tears of gratitude in her eyes, "You gave me back not only my money, but my dignity. For the first time in years, I feel like a person who deserves respect." These moments reminded me why it had been worth exposing my own family situation. My new life also included simple pleasures I had forgotten existed. I could go to the supermarket and buy exactly what I wanted, not the cheapest thing available. I could give generously to charitable causes without having to pretend that every dollar was a sacrifice. I could travel when I wanted, eat at elegant restaurants, buy books without checking prices, and most importantly, I could do all of this without having to justify my decisions to anyone. Public recognition came unexpectedly when an investigative journalist from the national newspaper learned about my story through the legal proceedings related to Evan and Sarah's case. The article she wrote about the invisible multimillionaire who exposed family abuse went viral on social media and turned me into a sort of symbol for older women who had been underestimated or abused. "Your story represents something bigger," the journalist had told me during the interview. "It represents the power women have to rewrite our own narratives regardless of our age." The article generated hundreds of letters from women sharing similar experiences, many of which became cases for our foundation. But above all, my new life had taught me that true wealth is not in money, but in living authentically and being treated with the respect we deserve. 6 months after that life-changing Mother's Day lunch, I received a call I wasn't expecting. It was Evan, my son, who had spent the last few months living in a 2-bedroom apartment in a middle-class neighborhood, working as an insurance salesman for a small company. His voice sounded different on the phone, more humble, stripped of the arrogance that had characterized our conversations for years. "Mom," he said, after a long, awkward silence, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but I'd like to see you, just to talk. Just to truly apologize." His voice broke slightly at the end, and for the first time in decades, I could hear the boy he had been before he became the man who betrayed me. I agreed to see him, not because I had completely forgiven what he did, but because I had learned that forgiveness is primarily a gift we give ourselves, not those who hurt us. We met at a quiet cafe downtown neutral in public where we could both feel safe to express what we needed to say. When I arrived, I barely recognized him. The impeccably dressed man who always flaunted his designer suits had been replaced by someone who looked tired, wearing simple but clean clothes with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. He stood up when he saw me enter, a gesture of respect he hadn't shown me in years. "Mom," was the first thing he said, and then he stopped, as if all the words he had rehearsed had evaporated from his mind. I don't even know where to begin. What we did to you, what I did to you, has no justification. There are no excuses that can explain how we came to plan something so cruel." I sat across from him and studied his face, looking for signs of genuine sincerity versus calculated manipulation. What I saw was a broken man, but not necessarily sorry for the right reasons. "Evan," I said softly, "tell me something. If I had really been the poor woman you thought I was, would you still feel that what you planned was wrong?" The question caught him by surprise. I could see his brain working to find the right answer, but he finally decided to be honest. "We probably would have justified our actions by telling ourselves it was for your own good," he admitted, looking down. "We would have said you were too old to take care of yourself, that the home was really better for you, that selling your house was the smartest financial decision." "Exactly," I replied, and for the first time since this conversation began, I smiled slightly. "The problem was never that you didn't know I had money. The problem, Evan, is that you decided my opinion, my wishes, my autonomy as a human being didn't matter. You treated me like an object you could move from one place to another for your convenience." Evan nodded, tears starting to form in his eyes. "You're right. Completely right. And I don't know how to live with that now that I understand it." He told me how the last few months had been the hardest of his life, not just financially, but emotionally. Sarah had left him just a week after the collapse, taking what little they had left and moving back in with her parents in another city. "She blames me for everything," he explained. "She says if I had handled the situation with you better, none of this would have happened. But I know she was just as cruel, just as manipulative. We both were." His words confirmed something I already knew. Even in adversity, some people don't truly learn from their mistakes. They just look for someone else to blame for the consequences. I told him about my new life, my projects, the foundation I had created to help other women in similar situations. I saw his eyes widen as he realized the magnitude of what he had truly lost, not just money and property, but the chance to know his real mother, to have an authentic relationship with me. "Is there any chance that we could rebuild our relationship?" He finally asked, his voice small and hopeful. "I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for you to give me anything back. Just, is there a possibility that one day you could forgive me?" The answer I gave him was one I had been formulating over months of reflection and personal therapy. "Evan, I have already forgiven you because forgiveness freed me from the weight of resentment. But forgiveness does not mean automatic reconciliation. Trust is built with consistent actions over time, not with apologies in a cafe." I explained that if he truly wanted to rebuild our relationship, he would have to prove that he had fundamentally changed as a person, not just that he had learned to regret the consequences of his actions. That means working on yourself in therapy, understanding why you were capable of planning something so cruel against your own mother. It means becoming the kind of man who would do the right thing even when no one is watching. We said goodbye that afternoon with a tentative hug, the first genuine one we had shared in years. I promised nothing, but I didn't completely close the door either. Time and actions would tell if there was hope for us as a family. Reflecting on this whole experience now, I realized that the most valuable thing I gained was not the satisfaction of revenge, but the discovery of who I really was when I stopped pretending to be someone else. For years I had lived in the shadows of my own capabilities, hiding behind a mask of humility that was actually fear of others' judgment. The woman I am today wakes up every morning knowing exactly what her value is, not because others have told her, but because she has learned to value herself. I make decisions based on what I truly want, not on what I think others expect of me. I surround my life with people who respect and support me, not those who tolerate me as a necessary burden. My story has become an inspiration for hundreds of women who write to me every week, telling me their own experiences of being underestimated, made invisible or abused by family members who should have protected them. Through the foundation, we have helped over 200 women regain their financial and emotional autonomy. But perhaps the most important lesson I've learned is this: it is never too late to rewrite your story. At 64, when many people assume life is already set in stone, I proved that we can completely reinvent ourselves if we have the courage to be authentic. The best revenge is not destroying those who hurt us, but building something so magnificent, so powerful, so genuinely ours, that their betrayal becomes merely a footnote in the grand story of our lives. The sweetest success is living so fully that those who once underestimated us realize everything they lost when they chose not to value us. Today, I am richer than ever, not just in financial terms, but in self-respect, authentic relationships, and the deep peace that comes from living completely aligned with who I truly am. And that more than any number in a bank account is the real treasure I found when I stopped hiding in the shadows of my own life. That was my favorite moment of this whole experience, realizing that I had reclaimed not just my power, but my true identity. And yours? Comment down below what part of my story impacted you the most. Don't forget to leave a like if you believe more women need to hear this message, that it's never too late to reclaim our power.